look at fostering engagement and compassionate strategies in the classroom when it comes to mental health and wellness. So before I get into our introductions of our amazing panelists, I'm going to pass it along to Ananya, who's my co-moderator today as well.
Yeah, thanks, Julius. Okay. I am Ananya Bhattacharjee. I am a PhD candidate in computer science, and I'm also a member of the Student Advisory Committee. And yeah, I'm very happy to be here and co-moderate the session.
Wonderful. So I will do some quick introductions and I'll tell you a little bit about the panel as well. So in designing this panel, one of the issues that sort of pushed this panel to the forefront from us was thinking about the issues that are happening right now on university and college campuses when it comes to student mental health and wellness. Our institutions are facing increasing demands for student mental health resources. We saw some of that being discussed today already. And this is a really important concern for us. It's a concern for faculty, it's a concern for staff, for students, our administrators as well. And we know that institutions are also implementing various strategies to help students in these goals. You know, some of these strategies have to do with counseling, with just-in-time delivery of services. But what the research shows us is that many students who are experiencing issues when it comes to mental health and wellness, or students who need supports, may never go out and access supports formally. And there's many different reasons why that might be. So one of the things that we were thinking about in designing this panel is, well, how can we engage with as many students as possible and provide evidence-based supports? And one of the primary sites of student activity and engagement is in our classrooms. And research tells us here that this is a primary component of a comprehensive strategy at the university level to address and promote student mental health and well-being. And we know that when students have experiences that are negative in these areas or where they lack supports, this can affect their educational outcomes, their educational trajectories, and their overall satisfaction with their educational choices. So thinking about students and thinking about the classroom as being that primary site of engagement. And what I'm really excited to do today is to focus on identifying what are some emerging opportunities, strategies, practical strategies that we can implement as educators. And from a student perspective as well, what does it look like in the classroom to do this work? And strategies that are flexible and working as well on knowledge sharing and identifying relevant resources. And really part of that conversation is thinking about across the U of T community, what are the different resources and offices and folks doing this kind of work at U of T that we can connect with. So I'm going to work with my notes here. And if there's one thing my students know about me that you get to experience today is me staying on time and staying on topic is a challenge. So to my right here, first up is Cristina Didiano. Cristina is a graduating student from UTM specializing in sociology, and her primary research interests reside within Canadian mental health care policy, stigma theories, intersectionality, and the institutionalization of mental health care. And her most recent work looks at how the public Canadian mental health system perpetuates barriers to psychotherapeutic resources. And I'm very excited to say that Cristina is going to be joining us as an MA candidate in sociology at U of T in the fall. So really excited for that. To my left here, Mohi Reza is a PhD candidate in computer science at the University of Toronto, working with the Intelligent Adaptive Interventions Group at DGB Lab. His research in human computing interaction is focused on building interfaces powered by AI, crowdsourcing and field experimentation that improve learning and well-being and collaboration in online environments. And Mohi's work has been recognized by a number of awards here, including the Robert E. Lansdale Okino Computer Graphics Graduate Fellowship, the X Prize Foundation as a leading graduate student, winning team in the multi-million-dollar Digital Learning Challenge, the Wolfhound Scholarship, and he has various different degrees in MSc in Computer Science, BSc in Computer Science, and at BRC University, where he was awarded the Vice Chancellor's Gold Medal, ranking first in CS. Congratulations. And certainly, and I'll pass over to you in just a moment here. Jordana Garbati is a PhD assistant professor teaching stream at the Institute for the Study of University Pedagogy and director at UTM of the Robert Gillespie Academic Skills Center. She's worked in the field of education for over 20 years and began at UTM in 2020. And she now teaches courses on academic writing, intercultural communication, is currently developing a second-year course on emoji communication, which sounds amazing. And at the RGSC, she oversees academic programming in the areas of writing, numeracy, learning strategies for undergraduate and graduate students, as well as educational development for instructors. So we have a really amazing panel from different aspects of our U of T community. So Ananya, I'll pass over to you for an introduction for yourself and then we'll get underway.
Yeah, it would be very weird if I talk about my awards myself.
Please do.
But yeah, I do research on designing technologies for well-being management, and I'm also part of the same research group as Mohi. And I have been part of some multi-institutional efforts. One thing I'm actually very proud of is we have worked on designing this text messaging system to help young adults all over the US and Canada. And our system has been deployed to, I think, now more than 10,000 or 15,000 young adults. So
Sorry to interject, but Anand actually got a Best Paper award for that project. He said it's awkward if he mentions his award, so I'm just doing it on his behalf.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Mohi. But yeah.
Got to celebrate our accomplishments. So what we're going to do for the panel is we'll do a couple of different activities. We're going to start off here with some questions for our panelists to share a little bit about their research and their relationship to the topics of the panel. We're then going to move into a round of discussion questions with the panel, and then we're going to head over to Q&A. And just a reminder that the Slido Q&A code is up, and we're taking questions over Slido that we'll address when we get to the end of the panel. So to take us out, Cristina, I'm going to pass it over to you. So Cristina, due to stigma, many students will not access mental health services or even seek out other supports. In this category, the research suggests that some students are concerned that they're alone in this process or that accessing services and supports might impact their academic standing. What can the research about stigma tell us about these concerns? And based on that, what are something that we can learn at the U of T community when it comes to helping students and helping to dispel stigma in this area?
Thank you for that. Yeah, so that's a good question. I can draw on my own research to try and answer that. So one of my recent research projects examined how students at the University of Toronto, Mississauga use social media to express their mental health concerns. And the three main findings from my research was that students tended to problematize their experiences a lot, and that was typically through some form of self-comparison. And not necessarily always to another person, sometimes to an idea of how one ought to be, and which is arguably can be contributed to stigma. But otherwise, students used a lot of labels. I called them fortune-telling labels because it was almost like they would just label themselves as having a negative experience just because they could not meet their own expectations or the expectations set out by others. And lastly, students asked a lot of assurance-seeking questions, that being exactly what it sounds like, assurance-seeking questions, but it was more implicit and explicit in nature. Some students would say, why am I feeling X, Y, Z? But others would just say, is anybody else feeling? So there's a shift in focus so that it's not centered on the person too. And I think that can tell us a lot about stigma. And when we think about the classroom, it's like, the reason why I'm saying this is it's important to know about research like this, because when we think about the classroom and how students perceive and understand their mental health concerns, we can really begin to theorize the types of traits and attributes and the appropriate and effective mental health services that we should be implementing for students. So the universality of students using this platform to negatively label themselves and use fortune-telling labels and ask assurance is arguably indicative of the need to create a safe space on campus for university students to express their mental health concerns and build community with other people. Like within the classroom, more specifically, I think that I'm sure we'll get to a lot of this stuff later on, but in terms of stigma, it would be creating a safe atmosphere. And it's not like just something that only a professor or a student can do. It is an implicit social contract between educators and their students to uphold and maintain the positive learning environment and like really make the classroom a safe space for people to talk about their mental health. So I think that once that's established and we begin talking about stigma consistently, we can really work towards destigmatizing the notion of mental health, not necessarily always through something institutional, but just throughout the discourses that we have with other people and our interactions in our lives. And then by doing so, the university can become a safe space for people to talk about their mental health without fear of judgment or being alienated by others.
It's That's a really excellent point. And we do see a lot of demands from faculty saying, you know, I want to support these issues. I want to be responsive and I want to promote that environment in my classroom. And what does that look like? And it sounds like there are practical things folks can do to dispel stigma in the classroom. And I'm hearing what you're talking about here is evidence of some of the universal design for learning strategies that are, you know, really positively associated with fostering that safe space and that compassionate space and a space that's designed to reduce stress and difficulty for students in the classroom.
Yeah, exactly. So like it doesn't always have to be something that's so institutionalized. If we want to talk about more on a micro level how we do things, it's just we can uphold the positive learning environment, and that gives people opportunities to build communities and relationships with others. And then once that is established, we can really begin to destigmatize that mental health, and then therefore like perpetuate more of the compassion towards other people.
Excellent. So, you know, one of the really interesting aspects of this panel that came out as well is that, you know, many of us, I teach a large class, 500 students. Many of us are wondering, you know, what can be done to try to address, you know, in classroom scale where we have a lot of students that we're working with to provide evidence-based supports. Mohi, you're conducting really fascinating research in education technology and human-computer interactions that can support students of classrooms of scale that are both personalized and relatable. Can you tell us more about your work and the applications of your technology?
Yeah, thank you, Julius. Yeah, so I do a lot of work on designing interventions using technology that can go out to students in large classrooms. These are typically courses with, let's say, 1,500 to 2,000 students. And these are all undergrad students who are transitioning from high school to university life, and they're really trying to do their best as they figure university out, right? And just to give you a sense of what these interventions might look like, I'll talk about one of my recent interventions that we deployed in a class at U of T. I don't know if you can tell, I'm super stressed right now, right? And, you know, sitting on this panel, and when I reflect on that, stress is actually it's not a foreign concept to students, right? And in fact, throughout their university life, there are multiple points where they feel a lot of stress. So what do we do to help our students with that, right? And one of the areas where students are regularly super stressed is, you know, exams, right? So in a recent intervention, we wanted to help students deal with exam stress better, right? And our first hunch was, well, we need to figure out a way so that students are not as stressed, right? We need to figure out a way to reduce the stress. But then one of my jobs as a someone with a computer science background is to look beyond computer science and draw ideas from other disciplines. So we looked at the literature, and it turns out that trying to reduce stress is not necessarily the best way to go about it, right? And the previous interventions that have tried to reduce stress have had mixed results. But there's this really exciting research about reappraisal, where they're saying that if you think about stress differently, if you learn to think of stress as a resource, as something positive, your body's reaction to stress can change. Well, that sounds great, right? But how do you help students change their mindset about stress at scale? So we came up with this quirky message that being stressed during the exam can actually help you do better, right? And we packaged this idea into this brief online intervention where we had videos and other media to convince students of this idea. Then, in a large classroom with around 1,200 students, we gave a random sample of students the intervention. We measured how long they spend on the intervention. So they could do this intervention from their smartphones or from their laptop. And we also measured their performance in the exam that followed like a few weeks after that intervention. So how long do you think students spent on this intervention? We tried to keep it brief. We were thinking, okay, maybe 10 minutes. Well, when we measured it, we saw that students only spent on average about 3 minutes on it, okay? So not a long time, but still more than 0. That's great. And so we were like, okay, that's great. Was this any good? So we looked at their performance in the upcoming exam, and it turns out that the intervention group performed on average 4% higher than the control group. So they got on average 80% rather than 76%, right? So that's amazing. 3 minutes spent trying to shift your mindset about stress to make it something more productive, 4% boost in exam performance. We were blown away, right? That's great. So now there's evidence that we can actually take this idea and apply it in real life. But then we did some subgroup analysis, right? And we looked at how does it affect women versus men, first-year students, upper-year students, we actually saw that the intervention helps first-year students more than upper-year students. And so that also got me reflecting on the importance of personalizing these interventions. So there's the challenge of taking knowledge from other disciplines, packaging it into a technology that students can apply, and then personalizing those interventions in a form that helps students with different backgrounds, right? So that hopefully gives you a sense of the kind of research that I've been up to.
And that's really fascinating because you're speaking, I think, to this particular experience that many of us are concerned with their experience of our first-year students.
Yeah.
We have recent cohorts that were coming out of the pandemic that were used to learning online, that were used to learning over Zoom, and coming into the university setting, which already includes its own challenges, its own particular challenges, and feeling isolated and feeling alone. We piloted an intervention in my 500-person Introduction to Criminology and Law and Society class, which had students coming together to do an undergraduate writing retreat, and essentially getting students together for the course of 90 minutes to speak and talk about their papers and about their concerns. And it did produce measurably better outcomes for students when it came to their self-efficacy and their academic well-being. And one of the primary things that we learned about that from qualitative surveys with students was that they felt alone. They got to campus and, the university is intimidating. They didn't know about resources. They're under a lot of stress and they feel like that's making them feel isolated. So this sounds like what you're working on could be scalable to a lot of different classroom settings as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So building on that, and I want to sort of stay in this lane, I think it's also interesting to note here that on our panel here, none of us are clinicians, none of us are in psychology. And, we're thinking about from people who do teaching and do work with students that, outside of that sort of traditional clinical lane that we see in a lot of mental health research and a lot of wellness research, what are some implications for students who and staff and faculty outside of those disciplines? So this is really fascinating work.
Yeah.
Ananya, I want to show it over to you now. So your work explores the role of technology in helping people manage their psychological well-being. How can we leverage those approaches and those technologies and designs in the classroom to improve student mental health and well-being?
Yeah, thanks, Julius. So what I try to do is, I'm from a computer science background, and we computer scientists often have this tendency to make cool things, but they don't really engage with the people who are supposed to use this. So how I approach my work is I try to engage with the actual users, the people who will use it. And sometimes I also consult with experts from other disciplines like clinicians or even like social scientists, psychologists, and then try to integrate those knowledge in the design of whatever technology I end up building. To answer your question, I think there's a lot of work going on. I'm sure we all have heard about it, ChatGPT. So there's a lot of work going on around this sort of, these are called large language models, where you can have a conversation you can have a conversation as you can do with not as you can do, but seemingly as you can do with a human being. So what I'm trying to do there is that taking those knowledge from clinical psychology or other fields and try to integrate them with these emerging technologies, not necessarily large language model, but there are also like your mobile phones on sensors. I don't know, the phones that you have that can track like how many steps you have made or whether you are walking or whether you are on a vehicle. So those sort of information collectively can provide a lot of information about your mental state, your health. And if we integrate them with emerging technologies like large language models, they can be really effective in providing you just in time support, or like they can provide you manage your well-being in certain ways. One of the recent studies that I'm doing is I'm exploring how we can design technologies to help students manage the stress, particularly procrastination. which I think something many of us relate to. We have designed, we have engaged with, again, experts, and we have engaged with students, and we came up with this. We're not calling this a tool, we're calling this probe, because this is not like something that will solve a lot of issues, but this tool looks like how it can work. And we took this to students, and we got a lot of great insights. And one of them is like, we often view student as a student. Like student has exam, a student has assignments, but students are human being too. That is something we often forget. So they have relationships. They have part-time jobs. They have a whole lot of identities. They are coming from certain backgrounds, and they have certain financial situations. So often when we design these interventions, we kind of view it in an isolated way, like let's help them do this activity, or let's help them manage academic stress. But what we need to do is we need to view them as a human being. We need to view them holistically. And what I'm trying to do is right now we have so many technologies that can give us some sense of what their identity can look like, whether they're stressed. For example, you can look at someone's digital calendars, and you can make sense of what sort of events they have. Your sensors can track like whether you are moving, how much you are sleeping, who are you conversing with. So what I'm trying to do right now is using all those knowledge and designing interventions that can integrate those contexts, like their relationships, their problems, their challenges, both as a student and also as a human being. Yeah.
This is a really interesting point. Probably not what people were thinking about when we thought about the role of ChatGPT and in our classrooms, and how it's changing how our classrooms operate in really fundamental ways. But I think this is also a really interesting set of interventions, because I think it was Sherry said in the opening panel today that we're working and teaching in a time of polycrises, and our students are learning through exceptional and extraordinary moment in our history, in our shared histories. And they have unique stresses, they have unique responsibilities and issues that I think many of us as educators, want to be tuned in and aware with. And also, finding modalities to reach students and support them using technologies and platforms that, they engage with every day, and turning, I think, what some people might see as a deficit sometimes into a positive in terms of leveraging technology.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, like if you just deploy GPT or deploy any sort of technology in the wild without validation, without testing, that is gonna fail. That is gonna harm. But there are ways you can use technology like GPT or sensors, and that's why like the consultation with experts, engagement with the target users come. Like that's why we do this sort of activity to figure out like where it should intervene. And for example, like when we consulted with experts, like often when people express their procrastinatory challenges, they're also expressing their like mental health problems. So our clinicians said that don't make ChatGPT solve those problems. ChatGPT should very explicitly communicate. By GPT, I mean large language models. But those GPTs or large language models, they should very explicitly communicate that I'm not a therapist. I can't give you like mental health counseling. What I can do is I can give you some structure of your activities, the upcoming deadlines you may have. So these sort of supporting roles technology can play, because often it is challenging to design solutions that are scalable. And we all know like it is often difficult to reach out. So technologies can play a supporting role in those circumstances, but technology is never gonna like replace the actual people who are providing support.
Absolutely. So scalable technologies that are also flexible to deploy as well.
Yes.
Sounds really important. Jordana, you teach courses on academic writing and on intercultural communication. You're developing this amazing sounding course on emojis, which I wish I could take. And you also oversee programming for learning strategies for undergrads, for grads, and for educational development for instructors. Can you tell us about some of the strategies and applications that you've engaged with in your practice as an educator?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Julius. And hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here. Mohi, I'm a little nervous too because I'm out of my element. I don't have a psychology background, mental health background. I'm not a counselor, et cetera, et cetera. But on the other hand, I have many years of being an educator. So I have several degrees really focused on education. And I've worked with students from elementary to secondary and now post-secondary. And I see mental health coming up in my small classes where I teach writing and intercultural communication, and also, of course, at the RGSC, our Academic Skills Center at UTM. And one of the things that I stress and emphasize in my classes is the peer-to-peer support. So in my observations of how students kind of figure out university, that peer-to-peer social connection is super important. So it's one of the things that I do as a classroom teacher, as an educator, and friends who have kids going to university. You know, are they gonna choose the right institution and the right program? I say, you know what? They just need one friend, because that one friend is going to introduce them to somebody else who's going to introduce them to a support on campus, an academic club, a sport, a something else. And I think that peer-to-peer work is essential. At the Academic Skills Center, we are a hub for students and a hub for faculty and instructors in the areas generally of writing, numeracy and math, study skills for undergrad, grad students, and for pedagogical support for instructors. And I feel like we are hopefully building, and we are, one of these safe spaces we've talked about earlier today for students if they have nowhere else to go on campus and they know of us at UTM, then we are a team of staff, full-time, part-time staff, student staff, professionals who can help be a liaison or give some guidance to students to find other supports that they might need. In terms of the faculty instructor side, we're also a hub so that we can help faculty design these courses and assessments that will hopefully be less stressful, more student-centered, active learning, so that students can develop their own skills, become confident in the areas that they need to become, learn about in their content areas, while also developing all these other skills that they're working on in university as well. I'll stop there.
No, those are really wonderful points. And I love this point about finding a friend, about finding somebody. And part of what we can do as educators is develop community in the classroom. That's one of the things that we can do that I think we should always be seeking out to do here, is introducing students to each other, getting students to know each other, even in our large 500-person classrooms, creating opportunities for students to develop connections, study groups. And I say to my first-year students quite often, get to know some of the people around you who are entering your program. There's a good chance that they'll be on the same journey with you, and they'll be in your second-year courses, your third-year courses, your fourth-year courses. And this is part of the community of support and friendship that you can develop as a university student. This is, fundamentally, a strategy that we can use to support wellness in the classroom for students, regardless of what their needs are. So, what I want to do now is just transition to our panel here and just ask a few questions. One of the questions that was asked this morning in our first panel, which are, what are some of the current challenges that you see, the most pressing challenges that you see in student mental health? And I would love to ask that to our group here as well, so we can get another set of perspectives, I think, on this really foundational question that's bringing many of us together in the room today and joining us online as well. So maybe in the sense, Cristina, I can pass to you first on this subject here.
So as a student, I actually just graduated from the University of Toronto, my undergraduate degree. What I see the most, and what Mohi and Jordana, I think you guys both touched upon this, was that students are very stressed. And I'm sure a lot of you here are also students, so you could probably relate to that firsthand. So that's definitely one of the stressors in a current mental health concern, because people don't really know where to turn to. And back to the first thing that I was talking about, when we bring up stigma again, it's also largely because mental health is so stigmatized, and that people sort of really narrowed their life down to just their experience. And when you don't have the community that's around you, you aren't able to build bridges and see if other people are also experiencing such a thing. So in terms of student life, that would be something that's probably more obvious, but otherwise there's personal issues that people deal with as well that sometimes you have to think about is not really going to come up in an academic setting. So we go to school to learn, but we're not there for like therapy. So nobody really brings stuff up about their personal life too. Again, going back to stigma, that can be largely responsible for that. So we have to think about how different contexts, whether personal and academic, can sort of intersect and create this gray area where people don't really know how to express themselves, and that's okay. We've just been conditioned in this society to sort of keep things to ourselves. And it's just a cohesive understanding of mental health and how one ought to be that sort of contributes to it. So that's a contemporary concern. And then another thing would just be not knowing where to turn. So it could be resources on campus. It could be resources outside of campus. And outside of campus, there's a lot of financial strain, like based on our public mental health care system. We essentially live in a system where only those with good financial standing can access the best resources or the appropriate resources to help them. And that's certainly stratified by other markers of social identity, such as race, ethnicity, gender, and then obviously socioeconomic status. So it's also about what can we do with what we have that's made available to us? How can we capitalize on the resources that are made available to us? But if we don't have those resources to begin with, or if we don't know where to turn, then we're sort of at a crossroads there. So I think that those are collectively some of the main challenges that I would identify in mental health.
And these are really important points. And I really like that you mentioned that some people feel like they can't talk about these issues. And I think as educators, as instructors, as TAs, as tutorial leaders, as senior undergraduate students who are working in a mentorship capacity for our incoming colleagues, putting ourselves out to the degree that we're comfortable in terms of fostering positive relationships and environments in the classroom, to the degree that we're comfortable talking about our experiences, our educational journeys, personalizing our examples in the classroom, and creating a relatable environment where people feel like we can have conversations. And you know what? When students come to me to talk, I'm not a therapist, but I'm somebody that, through identifying supports and what we're talking about today, to help to identify other resources that students can access to get those kinds of supports. Mohi, let me throw that same question over to you as well about the key challenges.
So when I reflect on that, I think one big challenge is that you have these formal forms of support, but not many students would necessarily turn to them when they needed the most. And instructors might not feel confident in providing the support because, well, they're not therapists, right? And so I think that's a big struggle. So when I think of designing these interventions, or when I turn to those who are experts in these topics and really reflect on how to package those into usable forms that instructors feel comfortable in sharing with their students, and students feel comfortable in using without, even in situations where they don't go to the formal forms of support. So there's like that tension that needs to be addressed. And of course, there's also the challenge of, shifting back from remote learning to in-person learning, but then we're kind of stuck somewhere in the middle in this hybrid situation, right? How do you help your students transition back? And also, how do you help your students, even if they are joining you remotely, especially if, let's say, you're teaching a large class, right?
And we're seeing increased demands for those hybrid styles of delivery.
Yeah.
We thought we had left Zoom in the pandemic when it came to teaching, but we're moving to a modality where we're seeing more online teaching becoming part of our regular teaching practice. And that presents in itself its own unique challenges of maintaining contact with students, checking in with them, and fostering that positive classroom environment.
Yeah.
Ananya, same question to you.
Yeah, so just before this session, we were having this wonderful chat on ethics, diversity, and inclusion. And one thing I realized is that often, however, we are approaching mental health, that is, we are making progress, but often we are ignoring, or we are less acknowledging people who are from marginalized communities. And also, there are certain aspects of human life, for example, say culture or religion, which play a very important role on how your mental health shapes up, and also like how you can manage your mental health. And for example, I know many people who turn to religion on when they face stress or anxiety. There are different practices in different cultures of managing your mental health. So I think how the challenge is that it's also difficult to integrate those religious beliefs or cultural beliefs and values. But I think moving forward, one challenge and one line of major future work could be that we take those values, we take those beliefs, and integrate into whatever form of support we deliver. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Outstanding. And Jordana, to you, please.
For the question. You know, the challenges are not just UTM or U of T specific. We are obviously from when I was an undergrad, the time has changed, and students now are growing up with social media, with economic pressures, discrimination, and the challenges are hard and they're real and they're out there. And then we see them in university, and that's how they've grown up, and now they have to figure out university. I was one of those students who figured out university, and maybe that's why I just stayed in university, because I knew that's how I could figure it out. But a lot of students come to university without knowledge of how the system works or how to communicate with professors. So in addition to these other challenges that we've heard, I agree with what my panelists here have said. Economic hardships, commuting is a pressure. We've heard that several times today. But I'm also seeing that students are challenged with the skills they need to succeed in university, how to take notes, how to manage their online or paper schedule, deciding if they're going to use a paper calendar or a Google Calendar, how to email professors, how to ask for an extension, how to read critically, read quickly, take notes while they're reading. And a lot of the time they haven't been taught these skills in high school or haven't had enough practice in high school. And then I see them in my first year writing class and they're overwhelmed by reading 2 articles for the week, let's say. So we have to, understand the challenges in order to then try to help support the students in the classroom.
That's a great point. And, some of the initiatives happening at UTM right now, and I'll plug UTM, and I know this happens at the other campuses as well, is engaging in services and programs to meet students as they come to the university. And, we're not waiting for somebody to say, you know what, I need help. We're not waiting for somebody to even be in a situation where they're facing a more acute need for support. Proactively meeting students as they come to the university, engaging with them, helping them develop, some of those soft skills and some of those study skills and other competencies and skills that will carry them forward in their education, and making sure that they see that foundation as well, and resources, very much like what the RJSC offers, those types of resources.
In the RJSC,
Yeah.
Every campus has supports like this that can help the students in reading critically in the sciences or in psychology and computer
Yeah.
science, et cetera.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so we have CTSI downtown, and UTSC has a Center for Teaching and Learning as well. So there are amazing supports at our tri-campus levels as well to assist students, to assist instructors, teaching assistants at every stage of the process. And Jordana, while I have you here, maybe I'll just reverse the order here. When we think about classroom-based supports, and I think this speaks to sort of the last point you made here, how can those be designed, and what are some of the resources that folks can utilize to develop those classroom-based supports?
So how much money do we have here at U of T? I'm a big advocate for small classes. It's partly what I've been, experienced with. I have experience as a student, but also now as an instructor, a faculty member, I teach classes of 25 to 50 students. So I feel really lucky that way because I can get to know my students. I know my students' names. I feel like I know when they're going on vacation, who they're seeing at lunch, et cetera, because I have that time to interact with them. I also see them or learn more about them through their writing because it's a very personal, endeavor, seeing what they're interested in. So small classes, in my opinion, are ideal, but they're also very costly. So I don't know if that's something that's a practical solution across the U of T. But knowing your students as much as you can and being that guide for them to help them figure out how to do university, I think is something that we as faculty and instructors, we can do. We can also educate ourselves as faculty instructors so that we know who to send students to or who to, take them to when an issue arises. And through COVID, through the pandemic, like many other instructors, I got these really, heartbreaking emails with students who are having real struggles, not I missed the bus struggle and I was late for class, like real hardships. And I'm not prepared and equipped to do that, even though I've done, mental health training and such. And I've been around for a while, but I got to know the UTM resources so that I could direct students there, or I could facilitate an introduction. In my classes, I always, several times throughout a semester, have a list of resources with the emails and the websites, so students can then have that PDF and look at it when they need. And it's both, the academic resources like Academic Skills Center, but as well as campus clubs and health counseling center, so that it's kind of, as Ananya said, developing and working with the student as a whole, not just, oh, here's a problem that I need to fix today. So yeah, guiding students through skills development. I think we can do this within our classrooms across disciplines. I don't know if it's done to the max that it could be, because some of the professors, of course, naturally want to teach biology and they don't want to teach how to time manage your study schedule for this biology class. But I think some more integration of the skill development within content courses, like was done years and years and years ago, I think is kind of an easy, cost-effective way to help mitigate some of the challenges and support learning in the classroom. I've advocated already for peer-to-peer support and student-centered learning. So what does this mean? It means activities in the class where the instructors are not lecturing for 3 hours. Activities where students get to share their idea with someone else. I feel much more comfortable. I'm in a panel with all of these people versus by myself. Students feel that in the classroom also. So thinking about how do we design that large lecture classroom to have opportunities for students to get to know one another, as well as getting to know their professor as well.
It's a really important point. And as our U of T community grows and there's increasing demands for some larger classes in some areas, larger sections, larger tutorials, and a lot of trickle down to individual instructors as ways to try to address these issues in their classrooms in ways that may seem very challenging. So this is an issue system-wide, and not just for U of T, for other large institutions as well, to grapple with as our communities grow and as we see increased demands for mental health and wellness supports. Ananya.
Yeah, I think Jordana kind of covered most of the things that I wanted to say. One thing and this is my personal sort of observation, that students generally, learn something when they are sometimes forced to. Uh, for lack of a better word, I think there could be like students take so many courses in the university, and but I think it would be really helpful for them if students are formally taught some sort of self-management courses, like how to manage multiple responsibilities, or what to do when you have like 2 deadlines and 3 part-time jobs or something like that. There is something I don't think, at least I haven't done my undergrad here. I was never taught, and this is something that I needed to. I don't think I do a very good job at that, but probably have gotten better. This is something people learn over time, but I still believe that at least the basics, how to reflect on your emotions, how to at least identify that you are feeling stressed. Even those identification or acknowledgement can help you at least manage your mental health. At least knowing that, okay, I'm stressed. I need to take things slowly. Even having that information in the back of your mind is helpful. So I think having formal courses that teach you life management skills and also like mental health management skills, it could be very helpful, as well as what Jordana said, like how do you manage your time as a biology professor or as an industry researcher
Mm.
or someone as an adult. Teaching those skills throughout the university lives could be also helpful.
And not just students learning, faculty learning,
Yes.
administrators learning, staff learning, always, on this lifelong journey of trying to improve our practice and learning and being receptive to new approaches and new techniques and facing new challenges and interacting with our community to face those challenges and knowing that you're supported to do that. Mohi, thought to you.
Yeah. So I was thinking about the point you made, Jordana, about, small classrooms being the ideal. And I agree. It'd be amazing if every classroom had like 5 students and 1 instructor and they all know each other. It's all wonderful. We have unlimited money. But then there's that competing desire to help more students and to grow as a community, right? So University of Toronto is growing, and over time, more people will want to get an education. And to help them, you have to think of how we can scale some of the benefits of small classrooms and bring it to large settings, right? So there's that thought. And I don't have an answer to that, but I think technology can certainly help. And also you might think, okay, so I'm a computer science person. Of course, I think technology is the hammer for every nail, but that's not always the case. So when I was thinking about solutions, for example, the example I shared at the beginning about teaching students that being stressed during the exam can actually help them do better, right? It's a quirky idea. We tried to convey it to students using technology, right? In the form of this little app that they can do from their laptop or their phone. But you could very well imagine doing something much simpler and low tech. For example, on their exam booklets, you could just write a message, like print it out along with the questions, which says that take a deep breath, know that being stressed during the exam can actually help you do better. So you print that out. You're gonna print these booklets anyway. It doesn't cost any additional money, but now you're still applying this really powerful principle from stress reappraisal theory and using it in a classroom in a really low cost way. So I wonder if we can think of more such simple solutions that doesn't require fancy technology, chat GPT, or anything else for that matter, right?
That can be meet and greets in the classroom. That can be check-ins. That can be student-based surveys to get their temperature of how the classroom environment is going and creating open lines of dialogue. I like that.
And there's the other thing that was raised, and I think is super important, is peer-to-peer support, right? And of course, it's really easy to imagine how that might work in a small classroom setting. You sit next to each other, you know each other by your faces and so on. But how do you scale that, right? And I've seen some really interesting work being done in that space at U of T as well. For example, there's Steve Jordans from UTSC who has this platform where peers can give each other feedback on their assignments at scale, right? I think it's called Peer Scholar. And there are other great examples which leverage this idea of crowdsourcing. For example, you have a math problem and you have lots of students trying to solve it, but maybe if you get it right, you could then be asked to leave a short explanation that can help your peers. So then the next time someone else is struggling with that same math problem, they'll have the option to see an explanation from their friend, right? And maybe just knowing that, your classmates are there to help you learn, that could have a positive impact. And you could imagine scaling that kind of approach.
And we're modeling collaboration.
Yeah.
Cristina, last word on this one to you.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for your input so far. I noticed that a common theme that we both all sort of brought up is the stuff about finances and financial capacity that we have to implement some services. So just something that's based off of what we already have right now. A classroom-based support, to me at least, can be something as simple as hosting a workshop, like to peer review each other's papers or whatever you may be doing. Maybe it was a test and like you want to go over the questions with your friends. And if you're an educator, you have at least some sort of agency in the classroom and the formatting of how it goes down. So I think that for people who are in higher positions of power, it's about capitalizing on what you are able to do. And going back to what you said, Jordana, you can't know everybody, and that's okay, but you can always do your best to try and know as many people as you can. And yeah, it's always about going back and asking yourself, like, what can I do to help? And people don't really talk about their mental health very often in public settings, as we've already mentioned, but creating these spaces where people can potentially make friendships and build more community will ultimately enable mental health expressions to become more normalized and like promote those discourses contemporarily.
Sounds like a really positive way to wrap up, I think, this section, because we only have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that we prioritize some time for questions on the Slido platform. Do we have questions?
For everybody online, there's actually a lot of questions. So we're probably going to get to about 2, but if there's specific questions for panelists, we will send it to them. And so we can post it on as part of the live stream, some responses. One question was, Cristina, can you give examples of fortune-telling labels and suggestions for students who might be using them? Cristina, sorry. Yes. I know.
Really?
Yes. No,
Fortune-telling labels. So this was actually, I used a constructivist grounded theory approach, if any of you guys are familiar with that. And it was a sensitizing concept based off of a psychiatrist. His name is Dr. David Burns. And this is he's like really big figure in cognitive behavioral therapy. And this is one of his own labelings. He called it fortune-telling labels. And it's basically the idea that people label their experiences as something, usually something negative when we're talking about mental health expressions and concerns, just because they can't meet their own expectations or the expectations of others. So it's like telling one's own fortune. I guess it's just like a quirky way of putting it. And it also goes to future projections, is that if people perceive themselves as a certain way contemporarily, that's the mindset that they adapt, and then they just continue. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. They just continuously engage in actions that like reinforce that. So hopefully that was able to help.
Thank you. And then the last question, but again, we can go online, and this might be for Jordana and the other student panelists. Wondering about thoughts on introducing happiness well-being courses or modules in first-year foundations courses, as are done at Harvard, Yale. I actually know a lot of places that have started to do this. So thoughts on that?
I would love to propose that. Like 4 years ago when I joined ISUP, apparently there was a course on the books about happiness. It's not my forte, but I would love to learn about it. But maybe it's someone else's forte. You know, I think meeting students and designing courses that they're interested in is going to help with the engagement, right? The emoji course that I'm very excited about, but you know, I'm not an emoji researcher. I haven't been doing that in grad school. It was actually a student's idea. And I said, that would be an amazing course about emoji communication, because I could see, you know, how it would relate to rhetoric and writing and things that I already teach, as well as intercultural communication. And then I proposed it. And luckily, thankfully, it went through. I hope it goes well. So meeting students where they're at, of course, with the content that I've got in my my goals too, would help. I feel like Mohi wants to say.
So from a student perspective, I would love to take that course. If you offered it, I'd take it. And what's funny is, as you were kind of mentioning that question, I was looking across the room, and over there I see happiness is impossible. It says right there. It says. It was kind of interesting that I saw that at that moment. But yeah, from a student perspective, I would really like courses focused on science-based ways to be happier, to succeed in university. It'd be really great if we were able to offer that.
I agree with that. I would also say that not necessarily a course on scientific evidence-based ways to be happier, because you could tell someone, you could feed someone a bunch of information, but it doesn't mean that they're going to digest it. So I would suggest, like, those sound like all great courses, but the actual, in terms of content, it would be something more like learning new thought patterns, and it's like accepting it's okay to make mistakes and not always have a strong mindset. And then once you can become like more familiar with your emotions, then you can really sort of get into the more technical stuff about that kind of thing.
And I think that even in a large class, even if it's not a specific course on happiness, we can, from a UDL perspective again, model including low stakes, low risk assignment designs that prioritize happiness, that prioritize students expressing positive feelings that they're having with their education, with the course, ways that, you know, their experiences in the class maybe help them think about their social world. I'm a sociologist by trade, so I'll double down on that. Getting people to engage with their social worlds and being reflexive and, you know, having that time and modeling it in a way in the classroom that not everything that we do in the classroom has to be this intense kind of, you know, very ends focused operational design of our courses. We can include breaks like that in our classes in ways that could really help students without, you know, having to have, and it'd be great to have the specific course, but not having a specific course, but including those principles in our day-to-day course design. So I think we are at time today. I'm going to end on, the live stream is ending. Okay. Thank you to everybody on the live stream. We really appreciate it. I'll look right at the camera back there. And thank you for the questions online. We hope to engage with some more of them as well.